So we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to be able to make this happen. With Periphery Media, our whole goal is to make sure or to create opportunities for artists in whatever way that can be. And right now, because we can't put together the exhibitions that we've done in the past, we are wanting to think of other ways to expand that. So we're doing things online, and one of them was I wanted to do this online Zoom call for grant writing for artists. So a little bit about me first. My name is Clay Hollenkamp. I am, along with Shelby Barenwald, we are Periphery Media. And Shelby's on the line also. She'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So if anybody has any questions, you can pop in there. Also, feel free to unmute yourself at any time and just give me a shout. This, no problem with interrupting, just do so. I'd rather you guys be able to answer your questions. So I've been a grant writer for arts organizations when I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 3 years when I was up there. And I was up there for about 7 years the whole time and sat on a number of grant panels, and also was a grant writer for a couple different organizations. Up there with just arts organizations, I raised about $3 million over the period of about 7 years for arts organizations. And then now I work for an organization called RCMA, and we operate charter schools and child development centers for the children of farm workers down here. And I've been here for about 2 years now, and I'm still a grant writer, and I've probably raised about another $3 million for RCMA too. So I've written a lot of grants and also sat on a lot of these grant panels for the Arts Council of Hillsborough County, where I'm also currently a board member, and then for the District of Columbia Commission on Arts and Humanities. So a little bit about my background. I've written a lot of grants. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm just going to go through the sections that are ordinarily on a grant. An artist grant varies from organization to organization, but all of them do tend to have certain sections on them that get repeated over and over again. So I'm not going to be specific to any particular grants, but pretty much these sections, you'll see them in just about every grant application you write somewhat. So I'm going to get started here. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. And let's see. Can you guys see just nod yes if you can see the slide, grant writing for artists. All right, great. So that's my nice little title slide. It's real cool and pretty, I thought. Okay, here it goes. Okay, so types of grants. There are all sorts of different ones you can get, but the main ones that you can apply for are for what's right here: equipment, educational experiences, project grants that include living expenses, and residencies. We're going to talk about the first four and not so much about residencies. Residencies are kind of hard to write about because they are so different. Every organization is going to have their own thing that they want you to tell them about for residencies. So I don't want to go into those too much because it's just so specific to the particular application and to the particular, okay, that's what I wanted to do. So it's really hard to be able to tell to be able to give you any description about what a grant for a residency is going to be. So a few things about these. Equipment, that's obvious. It can be anything under the sun that helps you accomplish your goals. So educational experiences can be defined in several different ways. They can be obviously something that helps you get better at what you do, but other times you can also call a conference an educational experience. So sometimes you can write a grant to attend a conference in some other place that will help you with your career even. Things like something that will allow you to meet new people or create connections can sometimes be considered an educational experience. Not all the time. It depends on the application or the particular group who you are applying to. It depends on the application. So reading the guidelines is always super important, but that is something that is sometimes allowed. Project, again, is pretty obvious. something that's going to help you write writing a grant to fund a particular project that you might have. Project living expenses, again, pretty obvious. So the first section that is sections of an artist grant. Okay, so we have personal information, artist resume, references, artist statement, description of the object of the grant, budget, work sample, and then post-grant report. So we're going to go through each of these in detail, and just some things that I've noticed over the years about what people tend to think makes, like what other grants reviewers tend to think are appreciated, and some do's and don'ts about each of these sections. Again, when you write to an application to a different organization, they're all going to have different things that they want, but pretty much they're all going to have these things right here on the application at some point. So let's go to the first one here. So when you look at, the first thing is almost always going to be personal details about you. So a few things about this. It's pretty straightforward, so not a whole lot to go through here, but a couple things. So treat the application like you would a legal document. You're going to want to put, be very specific about your address, be very neat, all those kind of things. Something that I know that I've seen come up that has been confusing is some people will write their artist, like nom de plume or nom de guerre, whatever you want to call it, their artist name on a grant application. So that's great if you're like Madonna, then write Madonna. But if your name's not on your bank account, don't use it. Make sure you use, because they're going to write a check to that name. So make sure that you are keeping that in mind and treat it like it's something that you are, like it's a legal document. Again, be neat, and then read all the questions closely. This kind of goes back to the being neat thing. You want to make sure that you are not putting the address where your name should be, or vice versa, something along those lines. Sounds obvious, but I see it happen a lot when people will just, scratching things out, and most reviewers won't take off for something like that, but it does add to the overall feel of the application. And that does kind of mean something. So not a whole lot to say about this. Again, it's pretty straightforward. Just keep these kind of things in mind and be neat about them as you go through them. All right, so artist resume. This is the first one that there's quite a bit to say about it. So obviously you're going to be honest. Make sure that you don't say anything that is going to be easily proved wrong. Most of the time, grant reviewers will look at your artist webpage. So if they look at something that is, if they look it up and they see something that's absolutely contrary, it's going to count off on you for sure. Because when we review things, it's certainly not frowned upon to look at look up extra stuff about the applicant. It's not always required, but certainly the more information you have, the better. So keep that in mind. Something that happens that I know that annoys the heck out of me is when I fill out an application for anything, a job or whatever, and they ask you to enter all your resume in, and then they ask you to submit a resume. It's going to happen probably. It's super frustrating, I know, but it does happen a lot. So keep that, just be aware. When you are submitting, you want to be detailed, but you want to keep your resume appropriate to the organization for which you're applying. And this might be like, you might not need to include if you're applying obviously for an artist grant, you might not need to include that you worked at before Brady's in high school, something along those lines. It should just be appropriate. You don't want to lie, obviously, but you want it to be appropriate to what you're doing. So a few more words about appropriate. If you're a young artist, like 20, 21, 22, you're probably going to want to include just about everything you've done. Include your high school experience, because that is applicable to you because you've only been doing it, you know, a couple of years. If you're an older artist, you might not necessarily need to do that. If you're like a mid-career artist, then including something from 20 years ago that you did in high school, it's not really going to be necessary. But at the same time, it might be. It kind of depends on the situation a little bit. Depends on where you're at in your career. If you're a brand new artist and you are 35 years old, again, I still might not want to include your high school art trophy or something like that. A good way to think about it is start your list of exhibitions on your application at the beginning of like a significant streak of artistic activities. So if you started, say you're 30 years old and you started, you know, when you were 15 years old as an artist, and you did, you know, consistently throughout high school, you graduated high school, and then you decided to get a job as something totally unrelated to art, and then you didn't do anything again for 6 years. So then you come back to, like, you know, you're like 26, 27 years old, and at that point you might want to start your application, your resume, at the time that you resumed your career. Something that is really important to granting organizations is that they want to fund someone who they think will be committed to their discipline. So if they see that you took a couple of streaks off during the period of time, then that can look poorly upon your application. Sometimes it's certainly reasonable. Like if you and your spouse decided to start a family and you took 2 years off, totally reasonable. I would put something in my application or in my resume about that, to explain why, because you want to make sure that your resume suggests that you are committed to being an artist. Even if you're, you know, brand new, if you're a young artist, you still want to give the feel that you're really committed to doing doing this, so that the money that they give you is going to be well spent. Does anybody have any questions so far? Feel free to jump in if you do. All right. Okay.
I have a question for you. If you've had a career in as a commercial illustrator or graphic designer, does that count as experience?
I think it does. Yeah. I think, and that's certainly an art-centric job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that would certainly count. I would certainly include that.
So if that takes up most of your time rather than exhibit time, that's still okay, is what you're saying.
I think it's something that I would include, so that, because that's an art-centric job. So I think it's something I would definitely include. And artists or art reviewers are going to want to see that you have been doing art in some way, however it works. I think sometimes it's going to depend on the organization to whom you're applying as to whether or not that it makes sense. Some applications might ask for someone who hasn't had a job in commercial art, and some of them they're going to want someone who's maybe more towards the exhibition side. I think that does make a difference, and it does happen sometimes, but I would include that. And if you're looking to go, and this kind of is this section right here, like more details about building your resume. If you were a studio artist or a commercial artist for a long time who's looking to get into being more of an exhibition centric and selling your own work and that sort of thing, I would do kind of what this is talking about in the beginning here, or the first line here. If you're an artist just recently beginning to try to make art a career, like as an exhibiting artist a career, enter as many juried shows as possible. And juried shows don't have to be like, it's not like you have to enter, you know, something at the Guggenheim. If you're trying to build a resume just enter whatever kind of juried shows they are. Like, for example, to plug Periphery Media, Shelby and I put on exhibitions every so often. And we are a relatively new organization. We're just starting out. So it's not like we're super prestigious, but some organization who you're applying for that might be in some other place, far-flung place across the country, is not going to know who we are. So seeing that you were accepted to this exhibition, that's a juried exhibition, and maybe you won Best in Show or honorable mention or something like that, that's going to be good. So I've seen artists who submitted to the Strawberry Festival, and like they're basically there. I can think of one specifically whose application, their exhibition experience was like 3 times at the Strawberry Festival and like 2 times at maybe a state fair, I think around here, maybe it was at the county fair, I think the one on 60. And that was their full resume. And I mean, they were funded for their application because they have something on there. So even if it's a small organization or a small show, that at least shows that you're making an effort to put something out there, to put your work out into the world.
Does that also include if you curated art shows, but maybe you weren't part of the show, but you created the show?
I think that definitely also counts, yeah, because that certainly counts. Any kind of arts activity at all is going to be helpful in showing what you're doing, showing that you're detailed to the idea of being an artist. That certainly helps. So in addition to what I was just saying about the juried shows, other things you can think about to build your resume. The last 3 here, collaborate, obviously you're going to add that as saying, this is what I've done. This is going to go somewhere. But getting involved in the arts community and go out and make art happen, those are just 2 ways that you will serendipitously end up with cool stuff to add on to your resume if you do those things.
Well, I do have a question pertaining to the commercial art aspect. If that is acceptable and if you've been doing it for a long time, what projects do you put in there to indicate, your activity in art? Do you just do something related to the grant, or if there was something big that you did?
I would think like say, for example, you are a advertising designer of some sort. That's
right.
What comes to mind. Say that's what it was. If you did, say, you were the lead illustrator on a campaign for such and such company, I think that would be a huge deal to say, like, if you did the illustration for Nike, I don't know, this company throw out this.
Oh, right. Yep, no, I gotcha.
I would write it down. I would say, I did this campaign. I did this campaign. I also entered this exhibition. I did this campaign, then this, then this. Something, that whole thing shows that that's what you are, that you have been working in the arts for a long period of time, and this is your background. So yeah, that could definitely work. If you guys understand what I mean by these here, get involved with the arts community. That's going to lead you places. That's going to have stuff to add to your exhibition. It's going to let you meet people with whom you can collaborate. And then going out and make art happen. Artists are going to do that anyway. Artists are going to art. It's just the nature of what we do. And all that stuff is going to add to your resume. It's going to help.
I have a question.
Yes,
what do you feel about like local art guilds?
In what way? Like in what aspect?
I've been asked to join a couple, but it's never seemed like the type of group that would support my particular style of art. So I wasn't ever sure if they would be able to push me forward in any type of way.
I get what you're saying. I really do. I know what you're saying. There are some groups that might not be people who you might feel would be able to challenge what you're trying to do. I totally understand that, but I do think it's at least valuable to say that you are a member of such a group, and to take some, even if it's somebody like, I don't know I know you're in Polk County. I don't know exactly what's over there, but I know here in Plant City, we have the East Hillsborough Art Guild, and not taking anything away from them. They do great things, but it is the majority of the people who are in that are retirees. And I could see how they might not work for a early 20s artist such as yourself. But that being said, I think there's a lot of value to being able to be in that kind of group, to say that you're in the group. And then also there are people who have a lot of experience. They might not jive with your particular brand of what you do, but they have connections with other people who have connections, and blah, 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 and all that. It's just getting involved with the arts community. I guess you have to keep an idea of what you're going to get out of it. It might not be that challenge you're looking for, but it might be some other kind of connection. It might be, friendship with an older artist who can help. All those things are beneficial. It's just getting involved with the art community. So I do get your point, but I think there's some value to that also.
Thank you. And then Shelby asked a good question in the chat as well about teaching art as something to add to your resume, because that's what I do full time.
Say it again. What was the last thing? Teaching art?
Yes, about adding that to the resume.
I think teaching art also definitely counts as something, because it is. So one of the major ways that artists make money is teaching. Most of us can't just sell. We can't survive on selling our art, most of us, not until you get to a certain point in your career. So artists make money by selling their work, teaching, commissions, grants. That's, so one of the major ways. So most artists are teachers. So yeah, I think that definitely counts. It's one of those things that you can add on there as being a part of your art activities. And it also fills in the gaps between exhibitions. So I know, like, you're a teacher at a school, so you might enter, say 3-4 exhibitions a year. I don't know, maybe you do more, but there's good long breaks in between. So it's nice to have something to put in. So yeah, certainly I would include that too. All right, so, okay, reference section. This is kind of, section's a little bit obvious, I think, but nonetheless worth going over. Choose the people who you want to serve as your references. You want to choose people who are pertinent to your work, like former and current teachers. Those are awesome people to have. Collaborators, other people who know your work, other artists who know your work, and then people in the arts community, like critics or administrators. I think those are like the people who I see most often on applications. It's not to say that there's other people who are not included often, but those are the ones that I typically run across the most when I review. It's these group right here. The people who I see sometimes that I would avoid using are like your parents or family members, your boyfriend, girlfriend, friends who are not artists. That happens a lot, and that kind of falls into this part below here. Someone who has no reason to have a valued opinion on your work. And I'd give a really big caveat to that, and that's this part below. Everyone's opinion about your work is important, for sure, and that's all these people here, but also, yeah, everyone is important, but that's not always the person who you need to have talking about your, they're not going to necessarily have an educated opinion about your work. So keep that person in mind. If you meet somebody out there, or you have friends who are very just really enthralled with your work and love your work, and it really means a lot to them, that's a great person to keep in contact with, and put them in your post-grant report, because your post-grant report is going to be, you're going to talk about in there things like the effect you saw in your audience, who felt a certain way, what kind of feedback you got. That stuff's going to go in your post-grant report, but you don't want to include something in your references from someone who doesn't really have an educated opinion about your work.
I have a question to ask you. I take my work and I put it into products, and I sell on a wholesale level. So I sell to museum shops, and boutique stores and all that. So are the people who own the stores credible? And also, is that doing that credible, or is it too commercial? And is it move it away from what they want?
I don't think I think those people are definitely, they're your customers. And if they, are come back and saying, I love what you did here, they know who their customer base is. So they're saying they know what's selling. So their opinion, I think, definitely matters, because they're coming back and saying, your work is popular. You are doing something right. So I think in that respect, yeah, I definitely think their opinion matters.
I guess the reason I ask you is because there was a grant, and I was told that the people who were judging, acting as jury, were academics, so that they didn't really want me to talk about my greeting cards and such. And that seemed crazy to me, because that's how I made a living.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. That does kind of go back to what I was saying before about it's going to depend on the different people, the different thing you're applying to. If someone tells you, if they outright tell you that, well, then don't include those people. If they tell you that's what the situation is, if you have zero idea who the panel is, then I would err towards putting that sort of thing in, because the more information, the better. But if someone tells you, look, we've got a bunch of, Harvard academics who are going to be judging this grant application, so don't put this stuff in, well, then, you don't put it in. But err on the side of putting it in if you have no idea who they are, because that stuff is all valuable. And that other person is an arts professional, or maybe not an arts professional, but they're a professional who has a valid opinion about your work. The people who I don't think is like someone who is, someone who walks up to your booth at the Hyde Park Art Fest and says, oh, your work is amazing.
Right.
You don't know who that person is. They have no particularly, unless you find out later that person is a critic, I wouldn't include somebody like that. Any other questions about the references section? All right, cool.
I think is this gentleman want to talk? He's muted.
Yeah, I was
okay.
typing.
Yeah, what's up, man?
I'll just ask it now, because I just wasn't sure if it was going to continue. I do like a lot of window murals for my kids. I'm a VPK teacher, and I recently did a mural in their school age room. But I'm always doing like window murals for them. Would having my director be one of my references be a good thing, or something I shouldn't do? I just do it for fun and I do it for them, but it kind of brings a different environment to like that space. And
yeah, that's a good question. Are these murals that you do, are they something that you just throw up in 10 minutes, or are they something you really seriously put some effort into, and they're serious projects?
Yeah, I do serious projects for their windows. I have like full blown out characters. I design it, and I show them how to paint it, and as much as I can. And the one I just did for their school age room, I mean, I took my coworkers helped me put it up, and the kids as well helped me paint it. So it's just, I take my time to design it and make sure it fits in the room and on the window and stuff like that.
Yeah, it sounds like that kind of thing that you're putting together is more than I would call that like a whole project. I think that fits under what I was talking about at the very beginning. What you can apply for, you can apply for projects. That's the kind of project, because you have other people, you're organizing a group of people to accomplish an artistic project.
Gotcha.
So if you look at it that way, if you just call them all their window murals, that's why I asked that question, because I was like, what's that? But if you describe it like you described it to me, it's a whole artistic project that you've brought together.
Okay.
And if you describe it that way in your resume or in your your work sample section, that might be something you put in there. And with that in mind, then yes, talking to your employer, your boss, and saying, please, give me a reference about this, describing the work that I've done and how it has affected our class or the kids and all that kind of stuff, and how it affects your job as an arts person. I think all that matters.
Okay,
and
cool.
A lot of it, again, it's how you paint it. Have fun. It's kind of how you put it together, how you describe it.
Yeah.
So, and that is trying to turn my phone on so I can hear if Shelby texts me again, because I can't see the chat box when I have the things shared.
Right.
So yeah, I think it definitely makes a difference, and you certainly could include something like that and just paint it as you kind of describe it like you described it to me after I asked about it.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Cool.
That's really cool.
All right, so the artist statement section. So every application is going to include a section that says, include your artist statement. Artist statement is going to be more about you and less about your work, the particular work that you're including. Obviously, it's going to include your work, but here you're going to, like I said, you're going to pour your art living heart out onto the page. You're going to talk about your motivations, your career, your goals for your career, your reason for being an artist, all that kind of stuff, themes that you prefer, different kind of mediums that you prefer. It's going to be more general. Let me go to my notes over here real quick too. So yeah, all that stuff, and you want to make sure that you are being general about what you do, and not, when I say general, I mean not specific to a particular piece, but more about your overall career as an artist, everything that you love about being an artist, all that kind of stuff you're going to put into this kind of section. A lot of times there are going to be a word limit or a character limit, which can get really tricky for those of us who just like to write and who can write volumes about this. But a lot of times you're going to have a character limit that is not going to let you write more than sometimes as little as 1,000 characters I've seen, which is really frustrating because that's like a paragraph. But you want to just talk about your motivations for being an artist. The last one on here, conceptual underpinnings, that's something that is, I think, is important. I think that is something that grant reviewers like to look at your application and think, okay, this person has thought about this. It's deeper than just they like to put pretty stuff on a page. They want to understand where you're coming from, and if you are kind of just saying, I think barns look pretty when they're painted in snow. That's not really gonna be enough. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who like to just paint those pretty landscapes, and that's fine. I mean, Bob Ross made millions doing it, of course. But those people who do that, they still have a reason for doing it. It's not like they just are. Not like they're just putting it out there for no reason at all. As an example, I will tell you about my grandmother. She picked up painting when she was 70. She's 88 now, and she is all about painting old barns. That's her jam. She does it all the time. And when I talk to her about it, I try to kind of peel back the onion and see if I can get her to tell me why she goes into that. And when I do, she says, it reminds her of her youth. It reminds her of what growing up in the Midwest in a farm town means, why growing up in a Midwest in a farm town matters to her, all those certain things. So if you are someone who is a landscape painter who likes to paint pretty pictures of barns, why is it that you like to do that? And this requires some self-introspection. Think that through. Not everybody's going to have the ability to write very, very conceptual sorts of things, but just think those kind of things through, because you do want to include that. Grant reviewers do like to see that kind of thing. so that they know you have more going on than just the ability to paint a landscape. So does anybody have any questions about that stuff? Okay. All right. Let's see, do I have anything else on here? Okay, so I do have some more stuff here. If you're applying to fund a project, your artist section, your artist statement section is also going to include some other stuff about the project that you are going to want to include too. So you're going to have all the stuff I was just talking about you and yourself. If you're applying to fund a project, you're also going to want to include some of the higher level reasons why you want to do this project. Again, thinking from a conceptual level. So what's the statement? What's the statement your project is going to make? Why is it going to matter? Why does it matter to you? How is it connected? How does this project fit into your span of work, into your career? Like how does it connect to what came before? Why are you doing this project? All these kind of things. So you're going to want to add these into your artist statement, assuming you have the space. Most of the time, if you're going to have a project, they're going to give you enough space to say that kind of stuff, or they're going to ask this in a different section. Sometimes the artist statement will give you the chance to write about yourself and then all this other stuff too. Sometimes they're going to split it up. But if you're working on a project, you're going to want to include that sort of different stuff. Another question you might want to ask is why you choose the medium, or answer is why you choose the medium that you did for this particular project. Why is it good for this particular project? That kind of stuff. So you would include that also if you were doing a project. So if you were going to fund a piece of equipment, in addition to the stuff about yourself, you are also going to include what will this new piece of equipment do that your current equipment does not allow you to do. So if you're applying, I think the best example I can give is of a camera. So if you're applying to fund a camera, what about this camera is going to be different than the last one you had, that you're going to be able to like reach new places with your art if you are able to do that? And be it a camera, be it a new set of brushes, be it whatever, what is it you can do with this one that you couldn't do with the last one? How is it going to help you with your career, like moving forward? How's it going to help you with your goals? And do you have specific plans for this equipment right now? So are you already have something that you know you're going to do with it? If you do, you'd want to include that in this section too. You want to make sure that you show a technical proficiency of the current equipment that you have and the equipment that you are intending to buy. Going back to the camera application or the camera example, a lot of times I've seen people applying for cameras that they don't show that they really know what's going on with the camera that they have or the one that they're buying. I know nothing about photography. I have no idea. So that means when I'm reading your application, I should have to look a lot of stuff up because I'm just not going to know what these different terms mean. But if I, being not a photographer, can read your application and say, oh, okay, yeah, I know all that, then that means you didn't give enough detail, because cameras are so technical that I should need to look these things up. And if I understand it, that means that that you're not giving enough detail. The same could also be true for a set of brushes, a set of pens, whatever. So those are things you want to make sure that you show that you know what you're doing with it. If you were to apply or trying to apply for an educational experience, you'd want to make sure you have your details set out, like know what your details are, when it is, where it's at, how much it's going to cost, all that kind of stuff. You want to make sure you know. Why are you excited to learn from this artist or this organization that you're going to learn from? What will you learn that you don't already know? Excuse me. And then what will this new information allow you to do with your career? Where are you going to go from here? Those are all kind of things that you want to include, and that most likely you would be given space in your artist statement to talk about that in addition to talking about yourself. And if it's not in your artist statement, it will be another section right around there too. The next section after that, did you have any more questions about that? All right, and actually, I guess these were in here too. Okay.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, ma'am.
If you, is it possible to do a Kickstarter campaign based on whatever it is you want to do and still apply for grants?
That's going to depend on the grant application. Sometimes they're going to say that you have to have matching funds. Like for example, a lot of the grants that you will apply for with the Arts Council of Hillsborough County are reimbursement grants. So you have to have some funding in order to make the project happen to be reimbursed for it. In that case, maybe, I'm not saying it is for sure because I don't remember right now exactly what they all say, but a Kickstart campaign could possibly be acceptable in that situation. It's really going to depend on the different grant application, but certainly that is something that's viable in some situations. All right, fun and educational experience. All right, so the next section is going to be details on the object of the grant. So this could be like the object of the grant would be, again, like the piece of equipment, the educational experience, all that kind of stuff. So in this case here, you want to provide as much information as possible, which is obvious. Again, if it's equipment, make me look up a lot of different stuff, like know your equipment inside and out. If it's an educational experience, you want to know the program, like I was saying, know the dates of the opportunity. And just in case you can't do this one for some reason, like, oh, say a pandemic comes around, know the next time it comes up too. Just so that the granting organization wants to know that if they give you this amount of money, the project is going to happen. So if you show that you know that should something crazy happen, you can't make it to this one, you know when the next one is. It just looks good. It's just kind of a good look that you're going to be able to give them a good impression of what you're doing. Another good thing to know about an educational program is if there's other notable artists that have gone through the program. So if there's somebody else who's great, know who they are and drop their name in the application. That's helpful. Know the teachers and their background. And that kind of goes back to why you wanted to learn from them. And unlike equipment, if it's an educational experience, we don't want to look up anything. I want you to provide everything that you have, all the information that I could ever need to include that into the application, so that I'm not left wondering, well, I wonder if he or she included this, or what happens if this happens, something like that. All those things are great to have included right there so we don't have to look them up. All right, so if it's a project, you're going to lay out your specific plan. You're going to have everything as specific as possible, like a schedule of dates. Obviously, nobody's going to hold you 100% of these dates, but if you say the grant program or the grant period is January 1st to December 31st of whatever year. So if you say that, okay, if I have this money in my hand by January 1st, then the first thing I'm going to do is this, and that's going to happen on January 22nd. And then the next thing I'm going to do 3 weeks later on February 12th is I'm going to do this, and have like a specific plan set out so that again, it goes back to the idea of giving people the impression that you really know what you're doing, that there's no kind of loosey-goosiness to it. for a plan. Now, nobody's going to follow you around and say, okay, did you finish that by February 12th? They're not going to do that. You'll have to report back in your your post-grant report. But by that time, as long as you accomplished the intent of the grant, nobody's going to care what your schedule was. So want to make sure when you write out your plan, you're going to include specific dates. When you write out, again, your plan, you want to describe exactly how it's going to be accomplished. So if you're trying to do a large public art project in downtown Tampa, for example, you want to describe, is construction going to be required? How's it going to be done? If at all possible, who's going to do it? Like, who's your team? So include all that kind of information. If you need a location or a gallery for this, tell the grant reviewer whether you have that gallery lined up, what you're planning on doing to get that space, or if you need a location, all these kind of things. If you don't have it settled, tell the grant reviewers how you're going to settle the question. So all that kind of stuff, you want to make sure you lay out as much as you can. Okay, so if living expenses are offered, there's going to be a lot of other guidelines. I apologize for the train that's going by right now. I live next to the tracks. So if there's going to be a lot of other guidelines about how you're going to use that money. So this is going to depend on the particular application. Sometimes it'll be a grant that will have an award of, let's see, I can't see what else is behind there. Sometimes it'll be a grant that has an award of such and such amount of money that you're able to use however you want, so long as the project is done. And I think that's going to be a lot of them. If someone's going to give you guidelines or going to give you extra money for your expenses, a lot of times they're just going to say living expenses, and you can do with that kind of as you want to. And as long as you have finished the project, nobody's going to ask you about it. Other times they're going to be specific about saying that so we're going to give you $10,000 and $8,000 of it has to be used for the project. And then this other $2,000, you can do whatever you want to do. Sometimes they'd be like that. Sometimes they'll also say that you can, if they give you the $10,000, to use that example again, they're going to say that you have to use $8,000 for this, and then you can use $500 for equipment, and then maybe $1,500 for whatever you want. There's going to be very specific. They'll probably give you very specific guidelines on those. Again, a lot of the same stuff applies here as does with the project one. Be as specific as you can. Have an idea about your budget for everything. Know how much, and we're going to talk about budgets in a minute too, but know how much that we're going to spend on food. Even if you don't know exactly, kind of have an idea how much you're going to spend for things like, for everything. Just lay yourself out a specific budget. And then some grants are entirely for living expenses, and they'll have their own thing. Whatever the case may be, however they come out, whatever they do with that, you just want to make sure you're as detailed as possible and tell everyone what you're planning on doing, and then try to stick to that plan as much as you can. Does anybody have any questions about this section?
I do have I guess it goes into this budget thing, but is it possible to make a profit on your project?
Not necessarily from the funding of the grant. The grant is going to usually be to accomplish the project. You can make a profit on the project itself. Like you can, make, say your project is to complete a 12 painting set, a 12 painting exhibition. The grant is going to fund the creation of that project, of that exhibition. And then you can make money by selling those works. You can make a profit in that manner, but they would not want you to be able to, say you got $10,000 to create these 12 paintings, and you spent $9,000. ideally that would not happen. Ideally, you would end up spending the $10,000. So sometimes that's going to mean that you change your budget a little bit, and maybe you needed some extra paints, and that's where that last $1,000 went. Or maybe you needed something extra throughout there. You're going to shift up your budget a little bit to make sure that you did use the money that you're granted on the project, no matter how you go about doing that. I don't want to ever tell you to be dishonest about something, but if you say you needed some extra paints, or say you had $1,000 left, then you could say, oh wait, I need to buy these extra materials. And then like, oh, I didn't end up using them. They're not going to come and knock on your door and say, let me see those materials. Let me see how much you have left. That's not going to be the case. If that happened, then you could say, okay, at the end of it, yourself that you have $1,000 left over. You would be able to maybe go out and purchase materials or paint or whatever else you had, and then put that into your budget as saying, this is what I spent it on. And then nobody's going to come to you and say, let me see how many you have left over, or something like that. They might ask you for receipts, but they're not going to come look and say, oh, you have these extra canvases and you didn't use them. That's not going to happen.
So can you ask for rent and things like that?
Sometimes, yeah. I've definitely seen some of those applications that will allow for living expenses like that, because that you can't create your project without having a place to live. So
Right.
there are certainly applications that will apply for that. National Endowment for the Arts is an organization that will often include that with their grants. Some bigger organizations will allow that. So yeah, it's certainly something you can include. It depends on the granting organization, but definitely. You guys want to take like a 5 or 6 minute? It's 5 to 7 now. Take a couple minutes. I need to get a sip of water. Maybe use the restroom. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. What's up?
Can we get these slides? As
Yeah,
well?
Definitely.
Okay, cool. All right.
Send you,
I'm like, there's some things I'm like trying to write real quick.
Yeah, I'll send this out to you guys, and then also it's going to be we're going to take this video. I'm recording this, so I'm going to take the video, and we have a YouTube channel, and as yet unused YouTube channel until this goes on it. So it'll be up there too, so we can.
Just real quick, because I had to come in late. I was on another workshop. Are you a grant writer?
I am a grant writer. I have been writing grants for arts organizations for about 4 years, about 6 years actually, in Washington, D.C. And then I moved back down to Plant City, where I live now, 3 years ago, and have been a grant writer at an organization called RCMA. We operate charter schools and child development centers. And then I also sit on the Arts Council Board of Directors, and have been on the grant panels for the District of Columbia Arts and Council of Arts and Humanities, and then grant panels for the Arts Council of Hillsborough County, and just recently was asked to be on the Florida Cultural Affairs Division Arts Council or grant panel. So yeah, a lot of grant panels over the past 10 years. Excuse me.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course. I'll be right back, guys. It's 4 till. Let's get started back at 7:01. How's that sound? All right, cool. Be right back.
This is really useful, Clay. Thank you.
Of course. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah. I'm just confirming things and taking notes.
Right on. And I'm sorry, who was this?
Soledad.
Oh, Soledad, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Same.
We got about a minute till 7:01, so we'll give somebody, I think Pam was stepped away for a sec.
Sure, everybody's away now.
Yeah, that's fine. We got time.
I'm here.
Yeah, it's cool. We've still got, looks like 45 seconds, 30 seconds, something like that. We're not in a hurry. I didn't expect us to take a whole 2 hours. I scheduled it for that just so we didn't get cut off in case we had any questions, but I left time at the end. So I expect this will be another half hour or so, unless you guys have a ton of questions after that.
You're gonna share the recording anyways, right?
I am indeed going to share the,
Yeah.
I'm going to put
I'm running out from I'm running away from an international conference right now.
Oh yeah?
I'm both, yeah, but I have my mother taking notes on the other thing.
Right on. Yeah, we'll definitely share this. We'll post it on our website or a link to it, and I'll put it on our YouTube channel. It'll probably be up there this weekend.
Great, yep.
Point. We haven't used our YouTube channel yet, so Shelby and I have to figure out how to do that. Yeah. I'm sure it can't be too hard.
Yeah, probably not.
I've seen some really ridiculous stuff on YouTube, and if people who post that know how to do it, I think we can manage it.
Agree.
All right, so at 7:01, let's knock these out here. So a really important part is obviously going to be the budget section. Again, a lot of the same stuff applies. You're going to want to be super detailed about how you're going to spend the money that you're requesting. A few things to keep in mind about that. This is something that I see people run into a lot, is requesting money for things that are not allowable expenses. Each grant is going to vary as to what's allowable, and some things that you might think that should be allowable are not going to be. Things that are typically excluded are like travel expenses in your personal car. So if you are going to a conference, say you're requesting to be able to attend an educational experience in North Carolina. Sometimes if you are requesting to fly there and rent a car, that's an allowable expense. But travel in your personal car is not an allowable expense. The reasoning behind that, I think, is because it's hard to define the amounts that you'll spend in your personal car. Whereas if you're buying a plane ticket and renting a car, you can define that amount. So they want to make sure, again, kind of going back to Pam's question before, that you're not profiting from the grant money. And other things that are not always allowed are food. Again, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because if you're going to North Carolina for that educational experience, you're going to need to eat. So, but nonetheless, a lot of times that's not going to be allowed. Sometimes it is. This is going to be in the guidelines. The grant guidelines are like your Bible for writing a grant application. So that's something that you really got to pay really close attention to, because that kind of goes back, if you mess that up, it kind of goes back to the thing that I was talking about before, in that it just makes your whole application look bad. It makes it seem that you were not paying enough attention or giving enough attention to the application. So that's something you really have to pay attention to. And again, these parts can get pretty confusing, because like, even if you cannot use grant funds to pay for certain things, you need to include them in your budget and say how you're going to pay for them. So I had this on another page. Let me see if it's on the next page here. Okay, yeah, here's some more information. So if you're going to fund a project, we'll come back to that, what I was talking about in just a second. You're going to think through everything you're going to need to cover. So think of like materials, if there's going to be, let's go back to that example we were talking about before about a public art project in downtown Tampa. The materials, so you need to think of what it's going to cost to do everything that you're going to do to make this. So if you're going to buy nails, if you're going to buy wood glue, if you're going to buy plywood, all of that stuff needs to be included. So that means you have to think out your whole project beforehand. So where I know, like, I do this all the time when Shelby and I do an exhibition, her and I both kind of do this. We kind of think it through once we're there doing it. When you're applying for a grant, you really can't do that. You have to have this plan all settled out and like know exactly what you're working on and exactly what you're going to need to do it, because they want to know with as much specificity as possible how much that project is going to cost. So you're also going to include in there labor or services from people other than yourself. So say you need to hire somebody who is a carpenter who's going to do some other stuff. You got to know what that guy's fee is going to be. And you're going to want to have an estimate from him or her, excuse me. You want to make sure you know that person's estimate. So you have got to think out what it is that you want them to do and let them know, so that they can give you an estimate in paper that you can submit with your application. You're going to, I think this kind of goes what I was saying right here, when you list the cost of something, they're often going to ask you for an ad or an estimate to prove the cost. So for example, if you're trying to, with that estimate for the carpenter, you want to be able to see that. You want to be able to show that estimate to the review panel, so they can look at it and say, okay, yeah, this is a reasonable cost and a reasonable amount for this expense. Sometimes you will want to, and that for a carpenter, it might not be such a big deal because their cost is going to be what it is, and it's probably not going to change. But sometimes you are going to need to state the date that you acquired that expense, that cost. So say in order to complete your project, you need to buy a nail gun from Home Depot. So they're going to, the grant application, the grant panel is probably going to want to see a printout, a screenshot from the internet that shows the cost of that nail gun that you plan to buy. It'll show, whatever it is from Home Depot, and this nail gun costs $495. So you're going to want to show that, but because prices change, there's sales, there's things go on sale, they come off sale, you want to make sure you note the date you took that picture, that screenshot.
What about shipping costs? Can you get that, in the cost as well? If it costs,
if it fits into your project, yeah. I mean, anything that it falls under, again, that's gonna be in the guidelines. It's gonna be one of the things that you have to look into and see whether or not something like that's included. If it was applicable to your project, like if you had to have something mailed to you, like that nail gun, for example, say it comes from wherever, they're gonna say like the expense is going to have the cost, the taxes, and shipping. So you're gonna include all of that on there. So that's certainly part of the expense of it. I think in most cases, if you needed to buy something like that and had it shipped to you, I would be surprised if it would ever not be included. There could be times when it is. That's something that you could always reach out to the grantor organization. They always have somebody who is I forget the person's title right now, but like at the Arts Council of Hillsborough County, they have a guy, grant manager. They have a guy there named Joe Federico, and he's a really easy to work with guy. If you ever have any questions about anything, you call up Joe and say, hey man, is this included? Because some things are kind of a gray area. So there's every grant application or grant organization is going to have somebody like that. So if you ever have any questions about something, you can do that, but you want to think things like that through. So again, going back to what I was talking about, like noting the day that you access the ad, and you're going to show that on the screenshot when you print it or when you provide it. And it just needs to be something as little as accessed on October 26, 2019. It just shows, not only does it provide the information, but I think on a larger thing, on a larger point, it shows the grant panel that you are thinking through everything, so that instills trust. They then have trust in you that, okay, wow, this guy or girl really thought through every aspect of this. So if I give this money to them, I'm pretty confident that they're going to finish this project because of how much they've thought this project through. It just instills confidence in you when they see that you've taken all these extra steps. And outside of the basic information, little things like that, I think those kind of things take a grant application from being a solid application to one that is absolutely a winner. Like little tiny things like that will make a big difference. To use the example of the Arts Council again, that because that was the panel I was just on last year, the way they do it is you have to have an 80 to be considered for funding. And then after they decide who has an 80 and above, then they start with the top score. That person gets fully funded, and then they go all the way down until the money is gone. So you could have an 81, and if there's no money left, you don't get funded. So that's stuff like this is what can change your average score from you have like 5 panelists and they all have their score, and then they average it, and that's your final score. So if you had something like that, showing that much extra could make one of the panelists think, okay, wow, I really believe in this person. So that could, bring your average score up a few points, which could lead to you being funded or not being funded. So tiny little things like that really can make a difference. Anybody questions about the project part here?
Nope.
All right, cool. All right, if you have the option to request personal expenses, much the same as above. But in this case, you're also going to talk about your personal spending habits, how much you spend on food, how much you spend on cleaning supplies, stuff, apartment, all that kind of stuff. You're going to, in this case, you want to be honest about things for sure, but not necessarily super detailed. Like, I would just say like personal expenses. Like if you say you spend $25 a week on weed, that's a pretty reasonable amount of money to spend on weed, so I'm told. But you can go ahead and say, personal such and such, and not say I'm spending $25 on weed. it's not much money. You know, if you spent $500, you need to say what the heck that is. But like, you want to be honest about things, but you can group stuff into categories. So you're not telling them how much you're spending on toothpaste or how much you're spending on such and such, just personal hygiene items, something like that. So all that kind of stuff, again, in a lot of situations when you have the opportunity to ask for personal spending money, just group them into reasonable categories and make it seem like it makes sense. If something is particularly expensive, you want to say what that is. But if it's something that is not, then just think that through and don't be dishonest, but don't be an oversharer. Does that make sense? I think it does. All right, so if you are requesting to fund equipment, this goes back to what I was talking about before. It's similar with the nail gun thing. Show a picture of the object from the place where you will buy it and the date on which you accessed it. Again, you've got that. They're often going to they're going to ask you to upload a picture of the item. Most of the time, a picture like that screenshot, they're going to ask you to upload like a PDF with all that on there. And it's going to say, make sure you say when you accessed it and where you're going to buy it, how much it cost on the date you found it at that price. That way, later on, if it costs more or costs less, they don't come back and ask you, hey, what's up with this? You can say, hey, I showed you on this date, this is what it was. That it just covers you. And again, it shows that you're thinking this stuff through. Anybody have any questions about these two, personal expenses or equipment? All right, cool. All right, so this one here is a little bit trickier. If you're going to fund an educational experience, you're going to want to know, let's use an example. That's painting class in North Carolina I mentioned earlier. So if you are doing that, you're going to want to know all the costs. So like, are they going to cover, say it costs $500 to attend this. Well, does that $500 cover meals? Does it cover materials while there? Do you need to bring your materials there? Do you need to ship materials? You want to know all these different costs so that they know that you have thought these things through. Will you be able to leave at night? Budgeting some spending money is allowed. Whether or not that spending money is covered, whether or not spending money is an allowable expense, that's going to depend on the granting organization. But if you are allowed to leave at night and you're in Asheville, North Carolina, which is a really cool place with a lot of cool stuff to do, you are probably not going to spend every night, at the location where it's occurring. So you want to make sure you keep these kind of different things in mind. Paying for flights, again, this is something that you're going to want to make sure you say how much the flight will be and the day you accessed it, because flights obviously change so often. They're often going to ask you for a link to the experience. So like a link to the organization who's providing the class. When you do that, you want to make sure that that budget that you're showing them matches 100% with what you provide. So what the link says. So if your budget says that this is how much it costs and they cover food and they cover this and that, make sure that that's exactly correct. I remember a grant from 2 years ago that the application and the link were just not even remotely close. And it happens. It certainly happens. So that's something you really want to make sure you go back and look at to be sure. Any other questions about these guys?
Yeah, when you are applying for like a class, an educational class that takes you outside of your town, clearly you've got expenses like, your rent at home and stuff like that. So is that usually addressed in this?
Well, not really, no. That's not something they're not gonna fund. They're not gonna give you money to pay like your rent at home. I've not
Hold on one second.
somebody.
Let me pause.
Let me mute. Oh, he already muted himself. Okay, cool. So that's not something that you would be able to request in most cases. I've also never seen anybody include that in their budget. And I don't think I've ever seen it asked for either. But I get your point though, and that would be like really taking it to the nth degree and making sure you're being super detailed. I think that wouldn't be, I don't think anybody would be upset that you put it in there, because that really shows that you're thinking things through. But it wouldn't be asked for though. I've never seen it asked for though. But you could, I think. I think if you really went extra, that would be taking it the extra mile for sure. All right, so here's a sample budget. This is kind of what one would look like. Okay, I've used San Francisco instead of North Carolina when I did this, but kind of the same idea here. So this is kind of what your application is going to look like, or your budget. So up here you can see I have like plane ticket San Francisco, and it's accessed. So funded by grant, not funded by grant, and then totals. So I'm saying the grant is a $2,000 potential award. So I've got $600, that's 100% going to be covered by the grant. Tuition for the class, I'm going to say 800 is covered by the grant, 200 is not. So altogether it costs $1,000, and I'm going to say 800 is the grant, and then 200 is not. And remember, I have over here room, breakfast, and lunch, Excuse me. Materials, fully funded by the grant here. Public transportation, funded here by the grants. Dinner, you're going to have dinner out maybe, because dinner's not included up here in this part. So we're making sure I cover that. So not funded here by the grant. Tickets to local museums. If you're in San Francisco, chances are you're going to want to go and see some stuff. You don't have to say necessarily museums. You could just say spending money for outside excursions or something along those lines. But you still are going to want to include something there. I mean, sometimes maybe you do just want to sit in the place all night long, and that would be fine if you did. But I think putting this in here is something that would be appreciated also, because most people are going to do something while they go out, when they go out on a location like San Francisco. But you don't have to. You can totally just say that I'm staying in the whole time, and nobody would be able to say, oh no, you're not doing that, because that's what you said. They're not going to go hunt you down and check you out on that. And then again, last one here, sightseeing, kind of the same deal, not funded. So here I have the grant. Remember, it's $2,000 potential award. So I have a total cost here of $2,000. And then I have not funded by grant over here. And then, for the total of $2,700. So this is generally what they're going to look like. This is about what they all have these kind of totals up here to show what you're going to do. And you just want to think these things through and include everything you can. There's a point I want to make. Let me see what's on the next here.
Can you give them an Excel spreadsheet?
Most of the time they're going to give you something to fill out. They're going to give you something. It might be an Excel spreadsheet. But if they just tell you to upload a budget, then yeah, definitely you can give them an Excel spreadsheet. But a lot of times it'll be something, they'll give you a grant portal that you'll go to, and it'll be a website that you log into, and then it'll have all of these different sections we've talked about as you go down the list. And then one of them will be budget, and they will either tell you to upload a spreadsheet, or they'll give you something like this. Mm-hmm. So, excuse me.
Now this sounds like probably a strange thing to ask, but what if you get an award for, going out of state to attend a particular event, and you get sick? And is there like grant insurance, or do you have to give the grant back?
That would depend on the particular organization, but a lot of times they're going to say to you, is there a way that you can do this next year? Is there a way that we can accomplish this project or attend this event because if they had enough faith in you to give you the grant, they want you to be able to do it. So you would work with a grant manager, and they would probably work with you and say, okay, how can we let you still do this, even if it takes till next year to do it? And then they'll make an amendment to your grant agreement that says something like that. So yeah, I mean, it happens for sure. I mean, I wonder how many people got stuck recently because of the pandemic. So like, what did they ended up doing? They weren't able to complete projects. I know with the Arts Council, what we've been doing is reaching out to all of the people who were funded in the past grant cycle and saying, what do we need to do to make this happen? Do you need, because some people had only received a portion of their full funds. So we said, okay, do you need more of your funding now? Do you want to push it off? So they work with you in most cases on that kind of stuff. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's the point that I wanted to make. So on this one here, you've got an extra $700 that's not going to be funded. So you're going to want to describe somewhere in there where that $700 is coming from. 700 is not a huge amount of money, but it is significant. So you're going to want to say where it's coming from. And sometimes you might say that it's going to come from just something as simple as wages from my job, whatever it may be. Sometimes you can say it's coming from personal savings, stuff, those kind of things, but you do want to address that because like I was saying before, they want to make sure that they can believe that you are going to accomplish whatever it is you do. So if you don't show how you're going to accomplish it, that's going to be a problem. So you want to say how they're going to do that, and nobody's going to question you. If it's $700 and you say it comes from personal savings, that's the end of the question. Nobody's going to follow up on that and ask you. They're just going to trust that you have $700. So, and I've never seen a situation where a grant reviewer didn't believe that somebody had money when they said they did. But I don't think that, maybe there are some organizations that do that, but I would be very surprised. But nonetheless, you do need to say where that extra $700 is coming from. But it can be as simple as I'm going to use my wages or personal savings. Anybody have any questions on the budget section anymore? All right, cool. Okay, work samples. So different grants are going to require different numbers of work samples. Some are going to be as few as 3. Some of them are going to want 10, but no matter what you're requesting to fund, they want to know something about your work, what it is you do. And they're likely going to ask you. I've never seen anybody not ask somebody for work samples. Again, it just depends on how many and what they ask of you. But some tips about what they're going to ask you for. You're going to provide high quality pictures or show your work in the best possible light or setting. So don't submit iPhone pictures. Try to find somebody who's a friend who's got a good camera to take pictures of your work. Try to provide the most professional representation of your work that you can. You want to answer all the prompts, things like if they ask you for the title of your piece and it's untitled, enter untitled. That's better than leaving it blank and then leaving the grant panelists to wonder if you just missed it. So something small, but it can matter though, or it makes a difference. If you get to make a statement about the piece, this is going to be a little bit different than your artist statement from earlier we were talking about, but it's going to be more particular to this particular piece, and they're going to want to know why you're doing this, it's going to kind of ask similar questions, but it's going to be directed towards this particular piece. So why are you doing it? What does it mean to you? What are your motivations? All those kind of different things. Something that I've seen a few people do that doesn't really look good is they will write the same artist statement about each piece. And that's just kind of lazy. It gives the grant reviewer, like just the idea that you didn't really try that hard with it. Or also sometimes they will give a bio in their artist statement in work samples. In the work sample section, that's not a place for the artist bio. It's not a place for the same statement over and over again. It's something about that particular piece. So the questions you'll want to answer are these kind of ones here. Why is it important to you? Why did you choose to include this piece of all the pieces that you could have included? Why this one in this application? If possible, maybe you can make it something related to the object of the grant. Like if you're applying to take an oil painting class, show some of your work with oils. It's kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised how often people don't always do that. Let's see, I did that. Again, another thing here, if you're trying to fund a large and intricate project, show other things that are also similar, or things that might require a lot of steps to give the grant panelists the understanding that you have the ability to execute that project in the end. Excuse me. Does anybody have any questions about the work samples? Those are just some pointers about them that I've run across before.
Yeah. Is it okay if it's old, or like how old can they be?
Sometimes they're going to ask you what they are. They're going to give you a deadline. Like they're going to want to say something that you've done within the past 2 years. I've seen 2 years be a popular deadline, that they want to see stuff that has occurred somewhat recently. Other organizations, I've seen them just not include any kind of deadline at all, in which case it could be something you did 25 years ago. But I have seen 2 years as being a popular deadline. That's a good question. All right. Okay, so this is the last couple slides here. So after you do, so when you get your grant, so say you're awarded, they call you up or send you an email saying, we're going to give you this amount of money for such and such project for your application. The next thing they're going to do after that is they're going to send you a grant agreement, and it's going to say in it somewhere like, we blah, blah, blah organization are granting you such and such artist the $2,000 to do this with, that's consistent with the application you submitted, blah, 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 blah. All that kind of stuff. It's going to be something that lays out the relationship between you and the granting organization. And one of those things that's going to be in that list in the agreement is a post-grant report. Grants always have a grant period, it's called, and it's the time during which the money is supposed to be spent. So you have to spend, so like right now, next month, I think June 17th is the beginning of the application period for the Arts Council for the Cultural Arts Impact Grant, it's called. That's for organizations, not for individual artists, but anyway. So the application period is like June 5th to July 17th is what it is. So then the period will start so by June 17th, everybody's going to apply. Then they're going to have the grant panel, which will be sometime probably in September. And then after the grant panel is done, they're going to tell everybody that they've received their grant, and then they are going to send out the grant agreement. And at that point, that will say that, okay, you have to spend all of the money that we're giving you here for this project between, I think it's probably going to be like January 1st and the end of the fiscal year, which I think is September 30th for the Arts Council. So you have a 10-month period. You've got to spend that money. You have to accomplish this project. Sometimes they're going to allow you to alter it or amend it if you need to. In situations like a pandemic or something like that, you'll have the opportunity to amend it. But there's going to be that period. So at the end of that period, let's say everything goes ordinary, there's no apocalyptic events that happen during the period of time. At the end of that, they're going to say, okay, now we want to see your post-grant report. This is what this slide's about here. Much of it is going to show that what it was you did. So you just will kind of just tell how it all came out. You're just going to answer the questions. They're going to ask you a number of different questions, specific questions about what it is that you did. And you're just going to answer the questions. It's not going to be hard. This is probably the easiest part of a grant, is reporting afterwards, because you're just telling what happened. But in order to be able to do this, you have to kind of think about it a little bit ahead of time. So you've got to take pictures. Pictures are a huge deal. You're probably going to take pictures anyway, but you want to make sure you do this. They don't have to be like super professional pictures. iPhone pictures are fine in most cases. I think it's always great to have somebody who has a nice camera take pictures just so you have them, because they're cool to have for yourself. But if you just take pictures with an iPhone for your post-grant report, nobody's going to complain at all about it. They'd rather you spend the time and effort on your work than on taking pictures.
So if you, let's say your project was to do 100 books, okay? Is it possible to send one of the books to, as
Sure.
part of the, okay.
That could certainly be something. In that case, pictures wouldn't necessarily make as much sense. But if you happen to do like a book signing, take pictures. You know, if there's a way that you can document something having to do with it. So in that case, like a book signing would be probably the only place a picture would matter. You could certainly provide a copy of the book back to the granting organization. But that's a very good example though. Other things that you can do, show people interacting with your work. This would be that place, and talk about effect it had on viewers. This would be that place where you would talk about that person who's in love with your work. That person before that we're not including as a reference, here's where you would talk about them, because this is where their response, their visceral, life-changing response to your work, this is where it matters. You want to generally be honest. If something didn't come out right, kind of talk about what happened with it. Talk about how you say part of the project didn't occur like it was supposed to. Then you're going to talk about how you got around that issue, what you did. Say you were building something and part of it just fell apart and whatever. So say, okay, this part fell apart. This is what we did to get around that issue so that it was still able to move forward. If it was not able to move forward and it was an absolute failure, just say that too. And as long as it wasn't due to your own gross negligence, the granting agency most likely is going to say, man, we're really sorry that happened. And, whatever, better luck next time. They're not, in rare cases, I think, are they going to ask you for money back, unless it's just your gross negligence, or you just didn't do something, or, you just absolutely, if you are at fault for the failure, well, then you might be in trouble. But if you made a good faith effort to make this project happen, they're not going to be completely upset if it just didn't work out right. So you want to be super honest about it. I would say generally honest, be pretty honest about it. If you want to try to paint it in a positive light. Don't really, again, be honest, but try to be positive about what happened. So if something didn't happen, say, this happened, but all this other good stuff came out of it. So I think that's generally something, like if you're talking to your parents when you come home from school and you didn't do so good on your report card, talk about all the good stuff you did, but this didn't happen so well. It's just an example.
Can you add any kind of social media benefit? In other words, like, let's say you get 100 people to sign up for your newsletter.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely something to include, for sure. That's a way of people interacting with your work. When I write grant reports for my current job, social media is a huge part of it, because that's just, we bringing people to our message. So it's a really big part of it, and it certainly matters. It certainly works for artists as well. So yeah, that's definitely something that works out, and I would definitely include that too. As something you're also going to think about in your grant reporting, but you've got to think about during the year, is keep all your receipts from everything you do. They're definitely going to ask for them. So if you bought that $500 nail gun, keep the receipt for that $500 nail gun and just stick it somewhere, because you're going to need to submit a copy of it at some point with your report. And then last thing I have on here is be sure that you paid for all of your allowable expenses during the grant period. So if that grant period ends on September 30th at the end of the fiscal year, and you have an allowable expense in your budget, but you wait until October 1st to pay for it, you might end up having to pay that money back, because that's something that was outside of the grant period. So you want to make sure that you pay for, if it's an allowable expense in your budget and you're allowed to use the grant funds for it, be sure that you do it within that grant period, because that's super important. Otherwise, you may lose that money. Have any other questions about the post-grant reporting? All right, a final few thoughts. So the first one, have good grammar. This is something that there's a little bit of conflict between grant panelists on this. So some people say that grammar is not at all important, because we want to make sure that we're funding people who might not have they have not had the educational experiences that others have, and that's certainly a thing. That's one side of the argument, is don't worry about grammar, because not everybody had the advantages you did when you were growing up. So that's one side. The other side is everybody knows somebody who has decent grammar. I tend to fall on the everybody who knows somebody who has decent grammar side. I feel like that if someone turns in an application that is just full of typos and just the grammar is abysmal, it gives me the feeling that they have not given this application enough importance. So if I don't believe that they could fill the application out properly, am I to believe that they are going to be able to execute this project properly? So that's kind of my thoughts on it. People go back and forth on it. If at all possible, have good grammar and don't let grant reviewers have to make that call. Most grant
there are like Grammarly.com.
Of course, yeah, that's exactly my point. That's
yeah.
exactly my point. I personally am a lot more forgiving if your grammar is decent but your word choice is bad, because people grew up in different ways. Some people didn't know English as your first language, all that kind of stuff. I get that. And I'm very forgiving when it comes to that. But grammar and typos, I'm not very forgiving on. I think it's something that just shows that you didn't give enough importance to your application. But like I said, some grant panels are going to be totally let that fly. Others are not. Just to avoid the problem, have good grammar. If you know that that's not your thing, spelling and grammar not your thing, ask a friend who does. And just take care of that. Let a friend read the application in the end. That's kind of something that, whenever we write anything, stuff makes perfect sense to you, but when somebody else reads it, it might not. For example, with this whole presentation, I asked Shelby to read it because I had no idea if it made sense to anybody outside of me. So that's something that's always good to think about. Think through all the questions. This kind of repetition of what we've been saying throughout the whole thing is think through the questions, answer them as completely as possible, be as detailed as possible. Too much information in most cases is better than too little. And all of these things together, if you do all of these things, the last one is going to kind of come on its own. If all these other things happen, the readers are going to know that you put effort into the application. I can think of one specific application from last year that I know this artist and I know his work and it's really good, but he just gave zero effort into the application. And I was really disappointed with it. And it was, and he didn't get funded. This is a really great artist. And I was very upset that he just didn't get funded because he put zero interest. Like he just wasn't interested in doing the application, put it that way. Like he just had no interest in filling it out. It was kind of like, I know that I'm good enough to get funded, so I'm not going to do this. And you don't want to give people, grant writers, that feeling that you're taking for granted the funding. So, but if you do all these other things that are listed above it, the last one's going to kind of come on its own. So I think that's the last. Yep. Does anybody have any other questions about any of the stuff that we talked about?
Do you have any recommendations of where to go to see what art grants are available?
I do have a few. Okay. So one place you can look, I'm trying to see everybody. Maybe this is all there is now. One place you can look is on the Periphery Media website. We have a page that has a number of grants or different grant options, and I'm trying to update it pretty regularly. It's peripherymediaonline.com. If you go to that page, let me see if I can bring it up real quick. Sorry, I'm trying to find our website real quick. Hold on just a sec.
While you're doing that, is there a problem in applying for grants if you've never gotten one before?
No, there's not. You can certainly, everybody's got to start somewhere.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I definitely think go ahead and apply for them. What's gonna kind of stand in your way at first is if you don't have anything on your resume. I know that's something that sometimes will stand in the way of some artists, some new artists, if their resume has absolutely nothing on it, sometimes that will be an issue. But in that case, you would start good and doing some of those things I was talking about before, where you start applying to little exhibitions here and there and that kind of stuff.
What about the pandemic grants? A lot of artists got grants just to get through the pandemic. Is that counted as a grant?
I'm not really familiar with those because they're just brand new and I haven't really been a part of any of them. But yeah, I think they would definitely be something that would count if you had a grant. But getting a grant is not necessarily contingent on having received other grants. I think you would include, like, if you received a grant, you wouldn't say, yes, I was recipient of the 2016 blah, blah, blah arts grant award. And that's something you could include. But if you never received a grant, but as long as you've been a professional, you've been making an effort at being a professional artist and applying for exhibitions and stuff over a period of time, it's the applying for exhibitions and putting together a significant resume is going to be more valuable than having received a grant in the past. So yeah, I mean, I would always include, if you received a grant in the past, make sure that you talk about that or include it on your resume. But if you have received no grants ever, but you have a strong exhibition resume, that's going to be more valuable than having received a grant. So this is our Periphery Media website here, and we've got a few grants on here. Most of these are still active. So like these are different grants and there's a link here to them. The Hopper Prize, most of these are relatively small, but I just did some research online and I found a few of these. And I'm going to keep doing that. So you can always come back to here and find grant applications. I think there's about 10 or 15, maybe not 10 or 15, maybe 10 of them on here right now that are available. I know one of them is passed. that one. It's already passed. I need to take that off there. But there'll be another in the fall, so maybe I'll leave it on there. So, and I left on here a link to all the applications or the more information about it on here too. Other places that you can look, just Google artist grants. The National Endowment for the Arts is a place that you can always look. The National Endowment for the Humanities also. The National Endowment for the Arts typically funds visual arts. And then the National Endowment for the Humanities will fund writers. It'll also fund like playwrights. It will fund those kind of things too. And then sometimes you'll get some visual arts applications that are available on National Endowment for the Humanities. But if you're a visual artist, National Endowment for the Arts is going to be the place for you first. I would also look at the Florida Division of Cultural Affairs. They're another organization that obviously they're in the state that will have grant information on it. And then there's a bunch of other websites like Periphery Media, though Periphery is the best. I mean, goes without saying, but there are others out there that will do exactly what we do and provide this information on it too. So, our goal is to provide opportunities for artists. So I would rather see you look other places and get funded than just spend all your time on this page with these grants. So keep an eye out for the on the Arts Council of Tampa Bay's website. I know that Sarah lives in Polk County, and I think Matthew lives in Pinellas. Is that right, Matt?
No, I live in Tampa, Hillsborough.
Okay. So, and how about the rest of you guys? Do y'all live in Hillsborough or Polk?
I live in Tampa.
You're in Tampa? Okay. So pretty much everybody on here then is, I think, unless there's
I'm in St. Pete. I'm in St. Pete.
So if you're in Tampa,
Sarasota.
if you're in Tampa, keep an eye out for the Arts Council of Hillsborough County's website. There's a section called Opportunities on there, and that's where they list grant applications that are upcoming. If you are in Pinellas, I believe it's called Create Pinellas or Pinellas Creative, something like that.
Create Pinellas.
Create Pinellas, but it is.
Creative Pinellas, I think. It's creative.
Okay, yeah, that one. So that's where I think they have some other similar things on there.
Right.
Down in Sarasota, I honestly am not sure what they have going on down there. You could also, another place I would think about looking would be educational institutions to see what they might have going on. So like the page for the USF Arts, the College of the Arts, whatever it is, visual arts. I would look at Ringling's College of Art and Design, their page be another place I might check out. So yeah, I mean, all those kind of places, I can't think of any more off the top of my head right now, but all those kind of places are places you can go. And you're going to find some stuff just by Googling visual arts grants or artist grants or stuff like that. So any other questions at all for anybody?
I had a question, Clay. Thank you for doing this for us tonight,
Yes,
by the way.
thank you.
But I actually, so the first time I've ever filled out a grant was for the Arts Council of Hillsborough, and actually got the equipment grant. And I was just curious if there was a way to see how it was scored and like what I did right. So as I move forward to keep doing the right things.
That's a good idea.
So is that possible, or how do they work with that?
So during the arts panel, the way when you apply for the grant, the way the panel works is so if you're on the panel, so let's say, for example, the application period ends on June 5th. So if it ends on June 5th, chances are good that within about 3 weeks, all the panelists, and there's typically 5, all the panelists will receive copies of all the applications. So we'll receive, say, 30 applications to read. So then we'll have about a month, maybe a month and a half to read all of those applications. And then there's going to be a date usually. So if it's in June, so probably by mid-August, there's going to be a date where we have a grant panel meeting, and that meeting's open to the public. So all the artists who've applied can come listen to us on the panel talk about their grants. They can't ask questions or anything like that. All they can do is listen and get feedback. But that's the place where you can find out the answers to your question. At this point now, I don't think that there would be a way that you could go back and find that information now, because it happens in a real conversation. But yeah, that's where you can do that. Those are always open to the public, and anybody, all the artists who have applied can have the option to come and listen and sit in.
And mention, what kind of equipment were you able to get?
I was able to get a Wacom tablet. So it's the big monitor that you can draw on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I got one.
Are you a digital artist?
I'm actually a visual artist. I do paintings, murals, and things like that. But yes, I have digital training as well. And it was to help transition more from getting the designs. When I'm designing for my paintings, you can see one in the back, I do a lot of pattern work. So I kind of do a lot of my, sketches, but also then on the computer, sit there and make the patterns and really get intricate. So this was a great way to combine both of those into a, fast tracking it a little.
I asked because I'm a digital illustrator as well as 5 or so. That's great to know you got a Wacom.
Yeah, it was amazing. So I ended up getting the larger ones. So the grant covered $2,000, and I think I paid around $26,000. So I funded with personal savings the rest of it.
What about training? Were you able to?
I'm doing it on my own, and then Wacom has tons of tutorials and things. So I've just been self-training and then hopefully saving up money, and if I need to get additional training.
Megan, I'm actually looking at one of your paintings right at this very moment.
Is it the intersection?
From Gasparilla Festival for the Arts this year.
Yep.
I have the magnet on my fridge. I volunteered this year.
Yeah, that was an amazing opportunity as well with GFA. And then this past weekend, Saturday, this between Tampa Downtown Partnership and the city, we painted the intersection at Franklin and Twiggs.
Oh, right on. I haven't been there in a week or in a while now.
Yeah, they the city just posted today in the Tampa Bay Times got some drone footage, because it's an intersection, so it doesn't look good until you're really up high. But so that was something I was able to use the Wacom and kind of coordinate that and figure out how my space planning.
Very cool.
Yeah.
The grant that Megan got, that $2,000, was the Professional Artist Development Grant.
Yes.
It's for $2,000. The past few years, that has been the total is $2,000 is that you could receive. The past couple of years, there's been about $30,000 total in the pot that could be distributed, and not a lot of people apply for it. Actually, there's been at most like 30, maybe 32 applications, I think, last year, and not everybody asks for the full 2,000. So almost everybody gets fully funded. So
Why do you think people aren't applying?
Because people think that grant applications are super hard. I think that I've really
intimidating.
It
was my first one.
Yeah.
And it just felt intimidating to even I assume there's thousands applying for this 30.
Yeah, that's why I'm
yeah,
hesitated, because I've always felt like I don't think I'll be able to make the cut kind of deal, and so
I
let alone just
I made it.
That is so good to know.
Yeah.
That's something I run into. Like, I live out in Plant City, and I'm always trying to get these some of the local nonprofits out here to apply for things. Like, we have the East Hillsborough Arts Guild. We have the Arts Council of Plant City. I'm on the board of directors of a newer organization called Make Plant City, and I'm always trying to get us to apply for things, because the only people who ever apply, first of all, are from downtown Tampa or Hyde Park, or are from, you know, nobody in Waimama in South County or in Plant City ever applies. And it's because everybody thinks that it's so difficult to do it. It can be.
Can you apply if you're in St. Pete? Can you apply if you're in St. Pete?
Not for the Hillsborough Arts Council, you can't. But there obviously are plenty you can apply for. But for the Hillsborough Arts Council of Hillsborough County, you have to live within the borders of Hillsborough County. And you have to have, if you're an organization, you have to have completed more than 50% of your activities, your program activities over the past 12 months within the borders of the county. But that typically is the reason why that people don't apply, is because they think it's very difficult. I hope throughout this that I've shown that it can be difficult for sure. It's not the most difficult thing in the world to do, but it can be, and some people don't want to do it. And with that, I want to make sure I include this. If you are someone who just doesn't want to do it or wants some input on it or something like that, Periphery Media does offer some grant writing assistance for some like pointers. It can be as little as $25 an hour. And then if you wanted a whole grant written, it would, you know, depend a little bit more on the case and the amount and all that kind of stuff. So
Do you review them?
I'm sorry?
Do you review grants? Or help, you know, once we write them, is there?
I certainly could do that. Yeah. That would be like, if you wanted some feedback from after you wrote it, the $25 an hour would be the cost for that. If you wanted it written, it would depend on a case by case basis how much it would cost.
You couldn't do it if you're sitting on the review board, right?
In that case, I would not be able to. So because I sit on the Arts Council of Hillsborough County, I cannot review Arts Council grants right now. So until my term is over, I can't do Arts Council of Hillsborough County grants, but any other grants, I'd be happy to work with you on.
Mm-hmm.
That's really
Let me know.
Just real quick, this is an old question I should have asked before, but is there a limit to the resume pages? How many pages to your resume?
Most of the time, I have not seen them put a specific limit on it. I've seen some resumes as much as 6 or 7 pages where someone just has a ridiculously long exhibition resume and people include it, and more information is better than too little. I haven't really seen, the places where I've seen character limits have been things like artist statement, work product statement, that kind of stuff. That might include a limit on how long you can make those, but I have not seen a limit to the length of your resume.
I got a question. For like, it's kind of for everybody, but like Megan, you said you did that mural like in the intersection, right? Did you have the design ready before you applied for that? Like, or you found the application and then came up with the design and then applied it to the application? That sounds like a silly question, but I just was trying to.
Yeah, no, the best thing to do, that was a special case because of the pandemic, and they had Franklin and Twiggs closed right now. So there was a lot of funding that, like, the city already had the streets closed, so they didn't have to pay for that funding. So they're like, well, we have the streets closed. Can we do this, and can we do it in a week? So that was a special invite from the transportation department that just knew of my artwork, probably through the Gasparilla, and just knows that I've executed a few large-scale murals in the downtown area. So that was an invitation only. But the way you would do that is there is a artist open call right now with the City of Tampa's art department. And so they're refreshing their artist pot, if you will. And so they're asking anybody to submit what you have and show, you know, projects. Like, so something with you is absolutely activating spaces with community kids and at schools. They would want to know that because they do large projects and they do very small projects.
Is that only Tampa? Is that only Tampa?
I'm only familiar with Tampa.
The one that Megan is talking about, it just came out like the call to artists, I think just came out last night, and it is for Tampa. I don't know if it's limited to Tampa artists, but it is for the Tampa government. And I can tell you, you can find the call at tampagov.net/art-programs. I will email it. Let me write down everybody who's in here so that I can email it to you guys. Hold on just a second.
That's really awesome. I want to be able to jump on something like that for sure. And
Yeah, I've been trying to work with the city of Tampa's art department for at least 12 years, and finally got in. They've had me like a year ago submit, one of the 3 artists to submit for a public art piece in a park, but I wasn't selected. But it was that whole thing, like, you're gonna get denied 100 times before you get that one chance.
Right. I'm sure.
Trying to be ready for that.
That's cool. I'm ready to get denied then. I'm gonna be on there.
Yeah. don't make sure your feelings don't get hurt.
I'm ready.
Go for it. I'm sure you can get it.
Oh, thank you. I will.
Yeah, with what you have in sharing of your intention and everything, I'm sure you can do it.
That's cool.
You can go outside of your area too. I had gotten my second public arts project for covering utility boxes in Pompano Beach.
Oh,
and yeah, I just got, my first one was for 3 boxes, and now they just selected art for 5 of them. So, and I found out about it on cafe listings. So, you know, you can think beyond your home.
Right.
You know.
Pamela, you said you do digital illustrations. Is that for like books, or do you do it like in graphic design?
Well, what I do now is I've been a designer, creative director, and illustrator. And what I do now is I paint acrylic and ink, and I also do digital art. And all my work is now in greeting cards, prints, stickers, all kind of products. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to be working with Creative Pinellas. I'm putting on a workshop for artists on how to get into retail environments. So, you know, if you guys are interested, somehow get me a way to contact you. It was supposedly planned for June, but I think it's going to be pushed, you know, beyond that since we can't get together. But the whole purpose of it is, you know, artists need to be thinking about ways to make money beyond the traditional selling in galleries, because not everybody can do that. And so making greeting cards is one of the easy, you know, the most effective way to do that. It's more affordable, and it's a way to get your work out there. So I'm in museum shops and stores, I mean, in different, you know, I'm in a museum, the National Museum of Mexican Art. I do Day of the Dead work in Chicago. So it's a way to literally get your name out, get your work out, and make money on it. So if you guys are interested in attending that, it'll be down here in Pinellas at Creative Pinellas in Largo. Somehow get me your information.
Could we share our emails in the chat?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
What I can do is I'm gonna send you guys this link to this Tampa Calls to Artists that Megan was talking about. And if you want to, Pam, you can just reply to that. It'll have everybody who's in here right now.
Okay.
Sound good?
What I can do is pre-announce the workshop so you can see how many people will be interested, and then get you the details once it's out. Okay.
Do you have an idea on when?
Well, like I said, it was scheduled for June. I still haven't finished writing it, by the way, but it was scheduled for June and then July, and now I don't know when it's going to be, but because I'd like to do it in person rather than online, so you can see and feel some greeting cards and stuff like that. But I'll just keep you abreast. I'm kind of like everybody else. Things are on hold, and hopefully it'll change. But the thing is Creative Pinellas has approved doing it. And it's real, and it's because they really think it's a valuable resource for artists. And there will be a lot of information in there that took me years to get. And I think you can get something out of it.
Yeah, this sounds great.
Yeah.
Something I was just thinking also, being that what the past 10 minutes I think have been super valuable. Shelby and I have been talking about just putting together like occasional like artist Zoom meetups, because this kind of stuff is collaboration. These kind of conversations lead to more work, that leads to more collaboration, that leads to grants, that leads to more experiences and opportunities. So I think sometime over the next couple of weeks, we're just going to advertise the same way we did for this, with just an artist meetup. So keep your eye out for that also. We'd love to talk more with you guys and hear what you have going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
That will be great, Clay. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll send this
Sorry.
to Pam or to all you guys, and then Pam can respond with her information, and we can keep a thread going about what's going on.
If you want to see what I'm talking about, you can go to my store. It's called PamelaJoyTrow.com. So that's PAMELA Joy TROW.com, and you'll see the kind of products I'm putting out there. And if you want to do the same thing, you know, I'm going to show you how.
Hey, let's go.
I really am a believer that we have to help each other. I don't believe in competition. I just believe in supporting each other.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with that. I am a sculptor, scenic designer, whatever else. And yeah, I've totally proved that the stronger and broader the communities,
Right.
it's for the benefit of everybody. It just develops a need from people. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, of course.
Hey, Clay, thank you so
Competition
much.
is weakening.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Clay.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
guys.
this is an example of that.
Thank you,
Clay,
guys. All right, you guys have a great evening. Thank you so much for coming.
thank
Hope
you.
you
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it.
Thank you very much for
Yeah.
sharing.
Good one.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Keep us on the loop.
I
Thank
will.
you.
Family, look is cool. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You can do it too.
Yes, go for it.
I'm gonna be there.
All right. All right. Take care.
You guys.
Yeah.
All right,
Bye.
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 you.
Thank you.